Hello everyone, this is the screencast for week 1. Week 1 has been deliberately allocated with very little reading. The set reading is part of the first chapter of the textbook. It addresses in a very broad way the structure of the Australian banking system, which is of course only one part of the overall financial system. Week 1 is a good opportunity to familiarize yourself with the interact subject side and have a look at the resources that we've posted. Since there are many pieces of legislation to consider in this subject, it is worthwhile taking the opportunity now to show you how to find it if you don't already know. There are two kinds of legislation. The first are acts passed by Parliament, also known as statutes. The second are rules which are known as delegated legislation. These are legislation made by another body which has the authority to make the rules because an act of Parliament has given them that authority. We are mostly concerned with statutes. Statutes are passed by both Australia's federal Parliament and also each of Australia's state parliaments. The official copies of statutes passed by the Commonwealth Parliament can be found at a site called ComLaw, as in Commonwealth Law. And the easiest path to the ComLaw site is through a search engine like Google, and so I'll take you there now. Let's say, for example, we're looking for the official version or the authorized version of the Banking Act 1959. We know, or you will soon discover, that the Banking Act is an act of the Commonwealth Parliament, and so if we want the authorized version, we'll go to ComLaw, and it's the first result. ComLaw has a number of features, but what we are looking for in particular are the acts. So we can go here, and in particular what we're looking for are current acts. Because acts change from time to time, are amended from time to time, there are different kinds of acts that you can look at. You can look at acts as they were originally passed, or you can look at, for a particular act like the Banking Act, a consolidated version which has all the which is updated to reflect all the changes that have been made to it since 1959. So what we want to look at is the current version, almost always, and if we click here, the Banking Act should be available. And there it is, the Banking Act 1959. Very important to know which year of the act you're looking for. So here's the Banking Act 1959. It appears like this, and you can download a PDF, and sometimes particularly long acts have several different PDFs precisely because they're so long, and they'll have endnotes and schedules as a different file altogether. But the Banking Act is fairly short. If you're particularly ambitious, you can buy a print copy, but I don't think that should be necessary. So that's how we found an authorized version of a Commonwealth Act, and most of the acts that we look at in this subject are Commonwealth Acts. That makes sense. It reflects the fact that the Commonwealth Parliament was introduced in 1901 precisely, or for one of the express purposes for which it was introduced was to create turn Australia into a single economic entity. So it makes sense that we would find a lot of the financial rules being produced by the Commonwealth Parliament. If you're looking for an authorized version of a state act, you should go to the website of the relevant parliament. So if you're looking for a Victorian act, you go to the Victorian Parliament website, and the Parliament website of any particular state will either have the acts or a link to a website to it. And let me give you a quick example of looking for an authorized state act. I'll use Victoria as an example. So if we go to the Victoria Parliament website, all of the various state parliament websites will be different, of course, and this process will be slightly bespoke, but in any case it's substantially similar. It'll probably be quicker to just go to legislation and bills, but I'll take you through the long way. You go to the Parliament of Victoria website, legislation and bills. And again, we have the bills, which are the acts that are to be, the acts that haven't yet been, or proposed acts haven't yet been passed into law. And here are the current, here are the acts that have been passed into law. And again, you see this distinction between current acts, which are the consolidated acts, which incorporate all the amendments, and then you have the acts which are literally the acts just as they are passed. So we want to go to current acts. And let's say, for example, we are looking for an example of state legislation would be the Australian Consumer Law and Fair Trading Act. Since it starts with A, this process will be slightly different from each state, but then we go down to here and we find it, and we find the authorized version, and here's the history, but you won't need to see that. So if you click on the authorized version, we should have the act. And here it is, the authorized version, incorporating amendments as at the 3rd of November 2014. Again, as you can see, it's a PDF document which appears in this way. There is an alternative avenue for looking for legislation, which is a website called Ostley. Again, most easily found by typing Ostley into Google. So if we type Ostley in, we find Ostley here. Ostley has both case law and legislation for both the Federal Parliament or Commonwealth Parliament and all of the states as well. Ostley publishes essentially unofficial versions of all of Australia's acts. And it's significantly easier to use because it's easier to get to the act you're looking for. You don't have to look at a PDF version. It's much easier to locate the sections, and each section is hyperlinked. And Ostley is unofficial, but there's no shame in using it in your studies. It's quite reliable, particularly for case law, but also for legislation. And I suspect most professionals who have a need to peruse an act use Ostley extensively. To take an example, let's use the Banking Act again. If we go to the Commonwealth, which is the federal jurisdiction, we're not looking for case law right now. What we're looking for is legislation. If we go to the Consolidated Acts, we go to B for banking, and then we can find the Banking Act here, 1959. And you can see what I mean by the different format. It doesn't appear as the act itself. Instead, it's a list of the sections which have hyperlinks to the text of the section itself. So if we go to section 1, you can see section 1, this act may be cited as the Banking Act. If we go to table, that takes us back to the contents page of the Banking Act. So they are two different alternatives. I suspect Ostley is something you'll find much easier to use, but it's really a matter for you. Apart from acts, if you're not yet aware of them, there are a number of institutions such as the Reserve Bank, APRA, which is the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, and other institutions that we will consider during the course, but finding their websites are easy enough. Just type the name into a search engine. As I said, the reading allocated for the first topic concerns the structure of Australia's banking system. It's explained clearly in the textbook. It's mostly historical and it's only a few pages, so there's no need to elaborate here. In each of the weekly screencasts, we intend to provide a pithy overview of the particular topic, but it's probably not necessary given the brevity of the reading. But one of the things you will read about is the limitation of shareholdings in, first of all, banks, but also in financial sector companies generally. That is to say, you can't, unless the treasurer approves an exemption, you can't own more than a 15% stake in a financial sector company. And as Tyree explains, this rule is contained in the Financial Sector Shareholdings Act 1988, and it's a Commonwealth Act, it's a federal act. And why don't we just go through and find that section as an example of looking for a piece of legislation that we need. So you will have read about in the introduction the 15% rule, but let's actually find it. So we're looking for the Financial Sector Shareholdings Act. If we go to, let's use OSLI. We're going to Commonwealth Resources because it's a federal act. We go down to Consolidated Acts again. We go to F. We look for Financial Sector Shareholdings Act. And there you have it, the Financial Sector Shareholdings Act. And so if you look through, you'll find, in fact, it's quite easy to identify where the rule is located. You'll see in Division 2, 15% shareholding limit. We start with Section 10, and you can see that the Act creates a phrase called the unacceptable shareholding situation, which is 15% shareholding or higher. Then if you look to Section 11, you can see that Section 11 is the operative provision. In other words, it creates the rule. It doesn't just define something or do something peripheral. It creates the core rule, at least for this division. So it says that if a person acquires an unacceptable shareholding situation, then or acquires a number of shares that results in an unacceptable shareholding situation, they are guilty of an offence. If we go to Section 12, you see the remedial orders. What can anyone do about that? If there is an unacceptable shareholding situation, and the federal court can remedy that. And then finally, Section 13 provides an avenue for someone to seek that exemption. And so that is a quick example of how you might find legislation that is referenced in the textbook. If you want to take a closer look at the legislation, that's how you will do it. That's all for week 1, and we'll see you in week 2.